The main ways I always try and approach a conversation whenever it's about support, and it sounds a bit cliche, but it's to be humble. And it's something that a practitioner colleague said to me a while ago, and there's someone who I respect a lot and I feel like is an expert in their field. And they said to me, whenever you're having a conversation with anyone about support, be humble. Go into it being curious, not knowing what the answer is, instead of walking in and thinking that you already have a preconceived idea of what someone's sense of support is. You can't just switch yourself off, but you need to lean into what is this person looking for right now? Because most of the time, they don't want you to go off and fix it, because you can't fix it.
Yeah.
They want you to witness them or be with them in that moment, or just help them untangle like this particular little knot that's going on in their mind. If you make a mistake, be honest about it, because that will work to build trust much better than you bullshitting them.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Be Brave Project podcast. Today's episode is how to support a survivor, do's and don'ts. And I'm joined by Denise. Denise has spent her career working in the abuse and violence sector with a particular focus on survivor participation and engagement at a systems level. Hi Denise, and welcome. Thank you for taking the time to join us today.
Hello, thank you for having me. I'm very pleased to be here.
Yeah, I'm so happy that we're managing to do this. So you've worked closely with survivor communities, policymakers and institutions. So rather than focusing on my personal story and just personal stories in general, I'd love to talk to you about what actually helps survivors feel supported, respected and heard. And I think like support is it's a very vague kind of word, isn't it? It can mean so many different things to so many people.
I think you summed it up really well there, to be honest, Chloe. Like, it's completely different for every person. And so the misunderstandings arise when people think it's just a blanket approach or the same thing for everyone. For some people, support is very practical and tangible and is about advocacy and, you know, physical changes in their life. For other people, it's emotional support. In other ways, especially in participation activities and engagement, sometimes support is just being reliable, not like being the person that someone can trust will respond to their emails, or help them book a train at an event, or just have that extra 5 minutes for them. So one of the main ways I always try and approach a conversation whenever it's about support, and it sounds a bit cliche, but it's to be humble. And it's something that a practitioner colleague said to me a while ago, and there's someone who I respect a lot and I feel like is an expert in their field. And they said to me, whenever you're having a conversation with anyone about support, be humble. Go into it being curious, not knowing what the answer is, instead of walking in and thinking that you already have a preconceived idea of what someone's sense of support is, because it's unique and it takes time. Sometimes people don't know themselves what support they want or need, and it's a bit of a organic process that you both have to go through.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's so true. And I think it differs from one day to the next, doesn't it? So one day you might feel like you really need a lot of emotional support, and some days you just need someone to just be there and not say anything. But that must be really tricky, because, and I know I said not talking from sort of personal stories, but touching on my experiences, I find that when I'm talking to people about it, and because some days you want to talk about truth to other people, but some days I just want to talk about it and I have no idea why. I just want to talk about it, and it's just one of those days where I'm like, I want to reel off everything, I want to tell you everything. And some days I am like, don't come anywhere near me, I don't want anything. And that's really hard for people that are supporting a survivor of specifically child sexual abuse. That must be really difficult, because it's so, they never know where they stand. So do you have any advice for people that are like allies, survivors? Do you have any advice on how to deal with those kind of mixed signals and mixed messages?
Yeah, it's complex, messy, and I don't think there's any value in trying to shy away from that or minimize it. It can be hard. It can create friction. It can miss the mark in conversations sometimes. And it really depends where both people are at. For my job at the moment, I'm working with survivors that are in a particular space in their lives and their healing where they're able to lean into quite heavy policy conversations and legislation, whereas someone that might be in a different space, how to approach a conversation about that is completely different. But I think some broad approaches you can take, and that are always a good place to start, is allow lots of space and pauses. Try not to finish people's sentences for them or suggest wording. It can be really easy to do it, and you think you're being helpful and maybe taking like some pain away by suggesting it. But actually, what I've learned is that there is something unique in allowing survivors and victims the grace and the space to figure out the language they want to use. And it may mean that there's some awkward moments, or the conversation stutters a bit, or you have to ask for clarity, or you kind of move around in circles for a bit, but that's okay. It's not always going to be this kind of to and fro, neat question, neat answer, let's move forward one step, neat question, neat answer, let's move forward one step. So I would say to people that see themselves as allies or want to be better allies is, it's okay to not have all the answers. It's okay not to have the perfect conversation. In fact, don't try to, because then you're going to get all tangled up. You know, lean into it and focus on what that other person is looking for in the moment, which again sounds really obvious, right? It sounds really basic. And there's probably people thinking, well, of course I would do that. But when we're having conversations, especially about child sexual abuse, a lot of the time we're so wrapped up in our own minds of, okay, how can I fix this? Or what should I do? Or how can I take the pain away? Or wrapped up in our own stress response that we stop properly hearing what the other person is saying. And so we need to rebalance that a bit. You can't just switch yourself off, but you need to lean into, what is this person looking for right now? Because most of the time, they don't want you to go off and fix it, because you can't fix it. They want you to witness them or be with them in that moment, or just help them untangle like this particular little knot that's going on in their mind. I could talk for ages about that, but all sorts of other things, but I don't want to ramble.
I think that was perfectly answered and really helpful. I think sometimes when I'm just looking for someone to help me process it, so just to sit there and listen for me to, and you know how I just said, sometimes some days I just want to ramble about it, and I think that's my brain processing what happened to me. And I always say to people, just listen. Don't do the whole, we have to go to the police and we have to do that, because that is not, sometimes it's helpful, yes, done in certain situations, but most of the time that's not what we want. We don't want that, let's try and fix it. And I know that's really hard, because that's safeguarding purposes. That's where you want to fix it, and you want to make sure that person that's done what they have to that person that you love or you care about, you're like, we need to get this sorted. But you also have to be in the right place to do that as well. And
there's different layers to it, because obviously if you're a practitioner and you do have safeguarding duty of care, so there's different layers to it. If you're a practitioner and you have a duty of care and safeguarding responsibilities, then there obviously is situations where you have to have a certain type of structured conversation and consequences, and you know, with mandatory reporting, probably, well, not probably, it will be coming in, that will impact it too. And also, if you're a clinician or a therapist, the way you approach a conversation, that's going to scaffold differently. But if we move those things to the sides and focus just on, you know, one human to another, it really is about just being as present as possible with someone, and not shying away from something that's difficult, because as difficult as it is to listen, it's a million times more difficult to be the person speaking about this. And both of those things can be true and hold value at the same time.
Yeah, I think that's one thing, talking about that, and going a little bit off topic, but when the first person I ever told was my sister, and I was about 15, 16, she's about 2 years younger than me. And I always feel such an enormous amount of guilt for putting that onto her, because she was such a baby herself, and telling her all of that information and then going, but shush, don't tell anyone. Jesus. It was so, yeah, what you were saying, both sides hold so much, and it is a lot to hear it and it is a lot to say it. And I just, that came to me because I always felt this amount of guilt talking to my sister about it when she was probably about 13, and then saying to her, but don't tell anyone. That's heavy.
But it's heavy for you, and it's heavy for her in different ways. And it just highlights that child sexual abuse doesn't happen in a vacuum. It doesn't just happen and then no ripples come out of it. And that's why support for survivors is important, and support for the supporters is important, because they're the ones in the periphery of that kind of initial explosion in a way. So
yeah, definitely. I don't think there's that much support for the people that have been involved in it but haven't actually experienced it. There's not enough support. I don't think, personally, there wasn't any support for my family at all.
Well, there's more than there used to be.
Yeah.
Sure. Definitely still not enough, or not widely known about.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a good point to make. It's not spoken about, and unless you know about it, you're not going to go necessarily seek it. Yeah, but I think that's a whole other topic that, again, I could talk about for ages. I do have another question that I thought would be really interesting, because in your work, which you do a lot of work in policy and things like that, and working with survivors, do you think is the biggest misunderstanding from professionals or loved ones when they're trying to support a survivor?
Oh my gosh, the reason I'm pausing is because my brain is just exploding with loads of different things that I've seen and witnessed. And they're all so important in different ways. But I think one of the first things that comes to my mind, which you won't be surprised at, Chloe, because I know you've heard me bang on about this so many times, is boundaries, of how you are holding that dynamic within a boundary, whether that's as a policymaker and a stakeholder, whether that's as a friend with a friend or a parent with a child. It's, what are the boundaries around that? Because boundaries keep the survivor safe, and they keep you as the other person safe. And when those boundaries are poor, that's when harm tends to happen. And a lot of the time when I see that, it doesn't come from a malicious place. It's normally like a really well-intentioned space, a good intention. Oh, I want to help, I want to do this, I want to do that. But good intention doesn't automatically equal good impact. And so there's a little bit of nuance there. And a common misunderstanding I see is when people either rush boundaries or ignore them, thinking that they're being mean, and that kind of erodes all sorts of senses of safety and trust and how meaningful the conversation can be. That's the biggest one that springs to mind.
Yeah, I think definitely boundaries is such a huge one. And I think it's also really important to mention that through healing is completely different. So everyone's going to take a completely different approach, and time is a huge thing. Some people will not be ready at the same time that other people will be. And another thing with it, I think there's a lot of back and forward. Like some days are amazing, they're feeling better, and then another day they're going to feel like absolute crap, and then you think, oh, what? Yeah. And just having those boundaries and allowing that survivor to go through the motions, and just again going back to that sort of support and being there for them. But boundaries is
having choice over it. Boundaries don't and shouldn't really, I don't think, be static and finite. They're going to be flexible, they're going to move and drift and flow depending, like you said, on how a person is doing that day. It doesn't even have to be about the abuse experience they've gone through. Maybe their train was late, maybe their coffee was cold, maybe they didn't have much sleep last night, and that's just affected how they are showing up today. It's allowing people to kind of bring their humanity, but know that it's in a safe scaffold. So if it wobbles or something does happen, then there's people there to help hold them and respond, rather than it all kind of snowballing and getting out of hand.
Yeah, great. Thank you for that. I think you've answered them amazingly, as always. You're so articulate, and you just,
I don't feel it a lot of the time.
No, you are. Honestly, the way that you answer questions is just great. So thank you for that. That was really informative. I would like to go on to, because obviously we're talking about the do's and don'ts. So I'd love to go on to the do's,
Yeah.
and what genuinely helps survivors. I know we've touched on some of them. So based on your experience working with survivors, what would you say are some of the key do's when supporting someone who has specifically experienced sexual abuse?
Flexibility and choice. Choice. But I cannot emphasize that enough, of giving folks options, the ability to revisit those options, have reminders of those options, so that survivors are able to feel as in control as possible.
Okay.
Even right to the last minute or in the event, give them the flexibility and the options. This is, you can leave if you want to, you can pause, you can turn your camera off, you can decide on the day that you just can't be asked with it today and you don't want to join in. Having that embedded into everything as much as possible, I think, from my point of view and from managing participation in different ways, that's always been a very successful part in helping to establish safety. Everyone feels safe in a different way, and everyone's going to need different things to viscerally connect with that feeling of safety. But flexibility, I think, is quite a common theme that runs through it. And you could apply that to lots of things. So choice around identity, how they're showing up, who gets to know what about them, choice about how much they share, and flexibility on that. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. You know, like you said, some days you want to say everything, other days you just want to have a cheese sandwich and not talk about it at all. So not assuming that just because someone showed up in a certain way one time, that's how they're going to show up the next time. Because I think there's still a bit of a misconception in survivor engagement work that somehow survivors should tell us everything in order for us to see them as credible or valid. And actually, I think that's quite extractive and quite dangerous, frankly. Yeah. So framing the conversation and the work around what do you want to share alongside what is it that we're trying to achieve, and how can we best use and uplift your experience and words to achieve that, rather than them feeling like they've got to bear everything, lay it all on the table, and then someone else is going to go, oh, actually, we're just gonna pay attention to that bit and leave the rest.
Yeah, that would be. Yeah. Imagine that one day where you feel like you want to say it all, and then someone says, oh, actually, no, we're not. Just, yeah. Oh, that would be incredibly detrimental to that survivor. That's great. Thank you. I think we touched on listening and not trying to fix, which is a huge one. I think believing is another one like that. It sounds so simple, doesn't it? But actually, again, touching on experience, a massive reason why I didn't come forward for so long is because I thought people aren't going to believe me. Why would they? And I think, and also, people that might be listening that have come forward might feel this as well, that sometimes there are days where I think, even though I've gone through the court case and he's in prison and I've done this whole journey, I still sometimes think, I wonder if people believe me. Do they believe me? Do they not? Even people that are so close to me, like my family, my mom, my dad, my sisters, is there like a little bit of doubt? Or I'm not quite sure. So having that reassurance, I think, is a huge one. And I know it's draining because you don't want to constantly give someone reassurance the whole time. But I think for me, and not everyone's going to be the same, but for me, and I'm sure people that are listening probably have the same sort of thing, that reassurance of that belief is really important.
And it doesn't have to be big flowery gestures and sentences. No. Sometimes it can just be very small moments, very small pockets, the odd word here or there that is just reminding them that this person is on my side.
Yeah.
And I'm not a clinician, so I can't dive into the psychology of it all, even though I find it fascinating. But I think as a society, there's still this kind of default of questioning the belief around not just child sexual abuse, but a lot of different types of violence and abuse. This is there. And I think part of it with child sexual abuse is that for a lot of people, this is not something they talk about. Me and you talk about this all day, every day. We're very used to it. For, your average person walking down the street, this maybe isn't a conversation they have ever had. They may not have even said the word child sexual abuse out loud before, let alone have someone disclose to them. And I think the kind of shock and horror and the disgust that people feel when they hear about it, it almost, I think, pushes people into this space of, I can't believe that happens. Like, there's something internally that is just too much to accept that is a reality of our world. But unfortunately, that often appears as someone not believing a survivor or doubting them or going, why didn't you tell someone? Why didn't you run away? And like, and victim blaming. So so it's a really complex one, belief, always.
It is very complex. And like you were saying, it really interests me about the psychology type of it, but I'm not a clinician either. I delve into it, but I do find it very interesting. Yeah, everything you just said, completely agree. Yeah. Another question for you, touching on your work as well. How important do you think it is for survivors to be involved in decisions that affect them, whether that's in services, workplaces, or specifically policy spaces and the justice system that we all love?
If your listeners can't tell, Chloe's being very ironic.
Very.
The spoiler alert, this is my bread and butter every day. So I'm always going to be advocating for lived experience folks to be part of these conversations on lots of different levels. Specifically at the moment, I think with policy, there is a uniqueness that lived experience individuals and survivors can bring, because they have literally lived this and are still living it in many ways. So they understand what it's like to move through these systems, where the blockages are, where the disconnect is between the reality of a policy paper and the implementation of a policy paper, what it actually feels like to be on the receiving end of it. And all of these things are so integral to know and understand when you're either building something new or you're trying to improve something. You don't have that understanding, I don't think any change you do will be sustainable or meaningful. And that's when it starts delving into kind of performative tokenism or kind of box ticking, that kind of stuff that likes to parade itself as engagement work, but as isn't actually engagement work.
Thank you for that. My take on being involved in decisions, especially when it comes to the justice system, and I have mentioned the justice system in several of my episodes, so most listeners will know that it's something that I'm very passionate about. And I'm sure a lot of people that are listening that are survivors or have been through it will know exactly what I'm talking about. And there needs to be more, because we, like you were saying, we know exactly what it's like. We've been through it. We've lived it. And it's very hard you can be as sympathetic or empathetic as you possibly can, but unless you have been through it, you do not know. And I do think that's very hard, because when it comes to, again, that, your loved one or a work colleague or a friend or whoever it may be that's trying to support you because they haven't been through it. But I suppose it's like anything. If you haven't experienced it, if you don't have lived experience with that specific thing, you're not going to understand it like they do. And that's really hard to try and to get there. It's really difficult. And I do appreciate that when going through my days, but especially when you're having a really shit day, it's really be as understanding as you normally are, because you just feel like the whole world's against you and you're like, why don't you understand?
It's isolating. It's isolating, and it can be very lonely, even if you're surrounded by people.
Yeah.
And I think, again, this is part of that like friction and messiness that comes with this work. Like, no one's ever going to fully understand, but that doesn't mean that they can't be there for you in a certain way. But it just takes that like to and froing of figuring out what that is.
Yeah.
And also, I think having survivors in these rooms meaningfully, in these conversations, it really helps to act as a guardrail, as a safeguard, as a kind of checker of people's bias. Because just as we're saying, someone who hasn't experienced child sexual abuse will never fully understand what it's like to experience it. Even within that, there are so many differences of people's humanity and identity. And we need different types of folks and different survivors in these rooms to go, okay, that's how it was for that person. This is what it's like for me as a disabled person moving through the system, as a Black man moving through the system, as a trans woman moving through the system, because all of those things add to the picture. Because if you're just having one type of survivor or one type of voice feed in, that your intention, again, it comes back to the intent. The intention is good. Impact isn't going to be meaningful for survivors as a whole.
So true. And I don't think people realize that. And you just touched on that. And I think that's really important. It's like anything, you want as many voices as possible. And I think that's a very important point. So thanks for that. Before we go on to the don'ts, which I'm sure there's going to be a lot of those, but you do bring both professional expertise and lived experience of trauma into your work. And I really appreciate how you've always been clear that survivors should get to choose how they identified, if at all, because some of us don't want to be. And how is it shaped how you approach survivor participation and support rather than what you disclose? Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And I think having lived experience of trauma generally has instilled a lot of empathy in me, which isn't always an automatic and innate quality that people have. I think sometimes we assume that everyone's like amazing at it, but actually, unfortunately, that's not the case, which helps me to connect to the real core purpose of the work. Again, Chloe, you will have seen it in so many of my bits and bobs of work that you've seen, but I'm always just talking about people's humanity. Like this isn't about defining people by their trauma or by their abuse. It's you are human beings. This happens to be part of you. How can I work with you in a way that makes you feel as a whole person as safe, as involved as possible? And I think having experience of being othered myself or being isolated or having those kind of fractured moments in the system has given me a bit of insight. Not total, I can never totally understand, but it's given me that little bit of insight that helps me in the trickier moments. It helps extend my patience. It helps me approach a problem more creatively. It helps me advocate for things more strongly. I suppose the flip side of it is that it requires a lot of internal and personal work. And I know that there are many practitioners in the charity sector and kind of frontline emotional support roles who have lived experience of the very issue they're supporting people with or an issue similar. And vicarious trauma and burnout, compassion fatigue, moral injury, these are all very real and unfortunately very common. So when you're doing participation work and you're using your own lived experience of whatever kind of trauma to inform that work, you have to be prepared to put in a lot of personal legwork internally. It's not the kind of thing where you can just clock in and clock out and not pay attention to what's going on inside your own body and your own heart and your own mind, because that can lead to some tricky places.
Definitely. Self-care is one thing that I definitely use for that. Because, you're right. Not everyone is as empathetic or sympathetic just because they've had a specific trauma necessarily working with. But I think most of us do, because we do understand it so much easier than others. And in fact, the work that I'm doing with this podcast, I've had to be very careful with allowing myself to feel the emotions of them, but also then take care of myself, because I'm just that person. I do take on everyone's stories, and I've heard a lot and they've been incredible and inspirational, but it's a lot. And you have to be very wary of yourself, because at the end of the day, yourself is the most important thing to you, and you've got to be safe and happy, and your well-being is important. So self-care for me, just silly things like going to go and get a cup of tea, like after this call, even though we haven't spoken about things that have been really hard, but it still brings up stuff. So I'll take myself away and have a cuddle with my dog and have a cup of tea. And that's my kind of...
And it's not silly at all. It's not silly at all. Like, and I think that's maybe part of like a bigger, broader difficulty that so many of us have, is that we do perceive self-care as selfish or silly, or especially if you're a survivor of child sexual abuse, the relationship you have to your own needs is a minefield. So even the act of allowing yourself to need something to take care of yourself can be really tricky.
Yeah.
And what I try and do with my work is I think of it more like self-maintenance rather than self-care. Because I know for me, with self-care, it feels a bit more optional.
Yeah.
And I can't hold myself to account with it.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if I frame it in my mind as self-maintenance, there's something more urgent and necessary about it. I have to debrief. I have to do this thing. I have to go and have this cup of tea because it is self-maintenance. It doesn't work for everyone, but that's how I manage to move past my own little wobbles and barriers with it.
I'm definitely going to use that because I do find self-care difficult. And even when my therapist says, "Have you done self-care this week?" No,
I don't think
no, we haven't.
the wider kind of society of capitalism helps because self-care is often marketed to us as something to purchase and use.
Or things like that. Yeah.
Don't get me wrong. Give me a spa
Oh, yeah.
any day of the week. But that doesn't feel accessible to people, especially if you're in these tricky moments of pain and you're like, oh, I need to take care of myself. Oh, I can't afford a spa day, so I'm just going to bin off self-care.
Exactly, yeah. And with a cup of tea is self-care. Running a bath is self-care, self-maintenance. That's what I'm going to use.
And sometimes it's the hard stuff, right? Like
Yeah.
sometimes the self-maintenance is, I need to go to therapy this week and confront what is going on in here. Or I need to journal about this. Or actually, I need to cancel those plans I have tomorrow. I need to say no to that meeting.
Feel bad about it.
Yeah.
And not feel that guilt of, I don't want to go out tomorrow. I don't want to go out for drinking. I'm just not feeling it. But everyone's going to I'm going to feel bad, so I'll have to go. No, it's really hard because I've done that a lot where, and I think a lot of people that have experience with child sexual abuse, you find it hard to say no because you've been programmed to say yes. So it's really tricky, but one thing that I have has been the best thing for me is learning how to not feel guilty for not doing things that I don't want to do and to take care of myself and not going out drinking if I didn't want to go out or whatever it may be, as an example, not to go and not to feel bad about it. Yeah.
It comes down to choice, right? When you've had choice violently taken away from you as a child, it is so important to have those opportunities to make informed choice as often as you can as an adult and give yourself the permission to, and have others give you that permission to. Like what we were saying earlier about if you flexibility of activities and engagement, if you choose to lean in or not. I don't think you can ever provide enough opportunities for choice. Obviously, you don't want to overwhelm people with a ridiculous amount of options, but as in reminding people that it is okay to make that choice, to put themselves first in that choice, and also not to feel like they have to manage the repercussions or consequences of it. They can make the choice and full stop.
And that's okay. Yeah. And it's okay.
Because I think it's quite common. I see it quite a lot where survivors will want to make a choice but will worry about the impact on other survivors and then kind of end up managing other people's situations and emotions, even though it's not their labor to hold, but just because they care so much.
Yeah.
But actually it's okay to have the no is a full stop, the choice is a full stop, and self-maintenance can just be yours.
Thank you. That was lovely. And I'm definitely going to use self-maintenance. I think I might do it a bit more if it's like a necessity. I have to do this.
It doesn't sound as snazzy and glam. Self-maintenance doesn't sound very great. It's not very good like tagline.
It works for you.
Works.
So yeah, it might work for others as well. But yeah, thanks for that. We move on to the don'ts. So where harm often obviously happens, and I know we have touched on it a little bit, but so on the flip side of the do's, what do you think are the most common don'ts? Are often said or done with good intentions, and I know again we've mentioned a few, but can actually cause so much harm.
I mean, we touched on some earlier that I care strongly about it. The sense of survivors owing you details, especially graphic details or violent details, or not feeling, but if people approach it as a very extractive process, you're taking what you need from a survivor and then that's it. No, it's my answer to that. Just no. Something else that I see a lot is, unfortunately, hierarchies of harm and kind of comparative suffering taking place, and then that being stoked by other people for their own means, whether it's, media, politics, or whatever. And it just perpetuates pitting survivors against each other or minimizing one type of abuse against another. And it's just so unhelpful and so harmful, and silences so many people and re-traumatizes so many people. So that's a big no from me. The other thing I would say is, stop thinking that survivors are all the same, that we're just one big group that all think and will say the same thing. We don't do that to, actually we do that to other groups and types of folks, but stereotyping and kind of having these broad assumptions of people isn't helpful, and it's dehumanizing and takes away so much from the individual that you're supposedly working with. So yeah, they're my big ones. They're the ones that I immediately think of. There's lots of other little things, maybe they would seem smaller on a day-to-day, but just things like, if it's in person, just don't assume people want a hug or are okay to be touched. Don't treat people like they're an unexploded bomb about to go off. What am I trying to say? I'm trying to find a better way of saying don't bullshit them, but I think that's actually what I want to say.
And I love that.
Don't bullshit survivors, because they can tell. Survivors of child sexual abuse are so in tune with a variety of conscious and subconscious signals, the change in your voice, your body language, the unseen things scanning the environment. They know when you're bullshitting. They know when you're lying. They know when you're trying to fob them off with a bit of a blasé answer. So don't do it. Be honest. If you don't know the answer, be honest. If you don't know the right step forward, be honest about it. If you make a mistake, be honest about it, because that will work to build trust much better than you bullshitting them.
I think safety in bullshitting is why they probably put people, because I've had people bullshit to me where I thought, what are you doing? There's an element of, I understand why you're bullshitting, because you are so uncomfortable right now and you don't know what else to do. But yeah, being just open and honest and just, not bullshitting 100%. And I love that.
I think, especially, if you're a practitioner, sometimes there's a worry about honesty and confidentiality and transparency, but you can be transparent whilst respecting boundaries and respecting confidentiality boundaries and codes of practice and ethical codes. This isn't about just word vomiting everything on someone, but you can approach things in a way that's authentic and isn't hiding behind fancy acronyms and long words and all sorts. So yeah.
I loved also the one where you said about the touching. I think that's a really big one for me. Again, personally for me, I hate any type of contact. The only person I will allow to give me hugs unexpectedly is my daughter. The only one. And my cat and my dog. But that's it. Any other kind of, if someone goes to hug me, I'm like, oh my God, don't touch me. I've had it many times, and I'm sure so many survivors have had it, where someone's gone in for a hug, and you also you don't want to be the weirdo that says, I don't want a hug. So you then just go for it, and then you feel really uncomfortable. And I find them so uncomfortable. And I know some people are just more tactile and more of a hugger, and that's okay. But when you're dealing with someone that has had specifically child sexual abuse or any kind of physical abuse, you've just got to be very careful, because you don't know, you don't know when it happened, you don't know the timeline, you don't know where they are. Yeah, that's a definite one for me. And I know that a lot of people, that's their kind of way of going, I'm here, so I'm going to hug you and make you feel safe. But sometimes it's not the right
and
way.
I think that word you said there, safe, is because for them hug equals safety, but sometimes for survivors that's not the same thing. Physical contact doesn't equal safety in the way that it might for someone else. So it's not about people, being on tenterhooks and eggshells around survivors, but just approaching it with a bit of care. I often will say to people, do you want a hug or a handshake?
Yeah.
Or if we are doing an event and I'm doing safety plans beforehand or well-being plans beforehand, I will talk to them about, would you like to have people hug you hello, or would you prefer to have some space between them? Do you want your chair a bit further away from the person next to you? So it's just really taking the time to be curious about what safety means for that person, rather than it needing to be a panicky thing of, oh my God, I can't do anything around anyone ever. It's just taking the time to be interested in what helps them feel safe.
And like you said, asking a question, a hug. And if that person says no, then you go, okay. And don't be awkward about it. Just be like, okay, that's fine. But asking, one thing I've noticed, you do that, and I love that every time. Because I don't get me wrong, I'm okay, but I have to be. It's different because if I'm not talking about it, or if I'm not in that kind of space, and I'm just walking into the office and I'm like, hi guys, morning, how's everyone? I'll give them a hug. Because it's a very different dynamic. But when you're maybe disclosing or you're talking about it, no. It's so just asking and being open. And again, going back to that, just don't bullshit, just be open and honest. And don't be, I think you're right when you're saying like it's people do tiptoe around it because they are scared of saying the wrong things. I think there's an element of that as well. And that's why there's so much stigma around it, because people don't want to say the wrong things. And especially in this day and age, people scared.
Do sometimes say the wrong thing.
And they do. And well, more often than not, they say the wrong thing. So I think they're just scared of not doing it. So then it becomes this weird thing. And actually, this is why I think doing these kind of things and having you on today, hopefully not just survivors, but also people that are listening that are guys or people that haven't experienced it but want to know more, this is going to help.
I think so.
I hope
it's definitely, I don't want people to think I'm perfect at it, and I'm definitely not always breezing through making perfect decisions all the time, but I think it speaks a lot to the importance of accountability in this work. It's not about being perfect. It's about being able to be accountable for your actions. So if you do make a mistake, if you do fuck up a little bit, how do you then repair that? How do you hold yourself to account, repair it, and heal that kind of moment that you've had with someone, if it can be, without falling into a place of defensiveness or a personal shame spiral or ego, which unfortunately as practitioners, sometimes that can really come into play, where you don't want to think that you've done something not great or you've made a mistake. But I think generally as human beings, we will find it quite hard to admit when we're not doing things the best way. But it is okay to make mistakes and hold yourself to account for them and try to repair them.
Yeah, absolutely. I have another question for, not one more question, I've got many questions, but another question that I really want to get your take on, because I find this really interesting, because I talk about what happened to me, and I'm one of the survivors that are, I don't know, what would you call me, like I don't know, whatever I'd be called, someone that speaks out. What do you think people often get wrong about the idea that survivors owe their story in order to be credible or listened to?
Something that I see a lot is that people equate credibility to the amount of detail someone shares and how eloquent they are at sharing it. And also, I would add another layer into that people then assume that they're at a certain place in their healing and recovery because of how they may be talking or how they're able to share certain details. So it's a really frustrating one, because I see a lot of pain inflicted where people demanding details from survivors before they believe them or before they see them as a valid person in that room. And it can feel so re-traumatizing to be on the receiving end of that. But I understand that sometimes this is from a place of that person not knowing what to do, not knowing how to have a conversation, not knowing how to approach it. That's not the survivor's fault, and they shouldn't have to carry that labor. I think it speaks to how we talk about this in wider society, and support and training and resources, etc. I also think that the kind of shock factor comes into play with this topic, where I'm in two minds about it, because sometimes I think there is great benefit in sharing specific graphic details to show the reality of someone's experience, and so that person doesn't feel redacted or sanitized. But I think so often we see this being co-opted by other people for their own gain, for a point they're trying to make, and then they're using a survivor's details of experiences, using a survivor's emotions, and then capitalizing off people's shock around it. I don't know whether I'm explaining that well, but
No,
ultimately it should be the individual person's choice of how much they're sharing. Some people want to share a lot of detail, some people don't. And there is, from a practitioner point of view, there is something there that I have to consider about what is the purpose of the space, the meeting, the thing that we are doing. How do I keep people safe in this room as much as possible? What does that look like if people are wanting to talk about graphic things,
yeah,
or specific details around specific parts of their abuse? How can I honor that, but also honor people that don't want to be doing that and also don't want to hear other survivors' experiences? Because you have some survivors that will want to share very specific details about their experience, but not feel able to hear about anybody else's, which again is completely valid. So again, not a very straightforward answer, but you guys speaks to the nuance of all of this, right?
absolutely. I think it's a question that I really wanted to ask because I think it's quite a complex question, and I think you've answered it beautifully. And I completely agree with everything that you're saying. Yeah, I think that must be really difficult for you as a practitioner and someone that works in what you work in, with finding when you have a room specifically filled with survivors. Every survivor will be in a completely different healing journey, and having to navigate who might say what, and that person might not want to hear it. And that, I kudos to you, because that's just a lot. That's a lot.
And I try my best. And like I said, I'm definitely not perfect, and I'm still learning a lot as I go, because you learn a lot from the people that you're working with. But this really comes down to the scaffolding and the boundaries and the planning and the conversations and talking to people about safety and managing expectations. I mean, all these words that we hear all the time, but you have to put so much effort and time into that before that moment where you're all together to help it be as successful and safe as possible. So fingers crossed, I keep managing to do an okay job.
I've worked with you, and I can say very confidently that I've always felt safe, and I think you do an amazing job. And it's a hard job. Yeah, thank you for what you do, because you're amazing. I am very aware that we've been talking for quite a long time, and I honestly, like I said at the very beginning, I could talk for hours and hours. Yeah, we've been talking for a while, and like I said at the very beginning, I could talk for hours, and I'm sure you could too. It's something that we're very, very passionate about. But and I think we've touched on a lot, and I think it's been very informative, and hopefully it will help people that are listening that are survivors or allies or want to be an ally. But just to round it off, I would love, if you can, to give some advice to specific people. For instance, what advice would you give to a friend or a family member supporting a survivor?
It is okay to reach out for advice. It can be a lot of pressure and feel a lot of pressure in that moment, knowing how best to support someone. It is okay to reach out. There's a lot of organizations and resources out there that can give you some guidance on what you can do. Don't feel like you've got to hold this all by yourself.
I think that's a great bit of advice. And at the end, if you have specific places that you know that people could reach out to, if you could send those to me, I can put them at the end so people can have those. That would be really helpful. What advice would you give to a professional working with survivors?
I would start off saying, take care of yourself. It is not a secret that this sector is underfunded, oversubscribed, and full of pressure. So take good care of yourself. The other thing I would say is check your bias. And I mean that not in a shaming way or in a way to be nasty, but so often our unconscious bias is having an effect on how we as practitioners are approaching our work. And when we leave it unchecked, we can get into some bad habits, and these bad habits cause harm to survivors. So take time to check your bias. We all have them. There's nothing to be ashamed of. It's about how we interrogate them and how we choose to express them.
Yeah.
That makes the difference.
Love that. I think that's, again, a great bit of advice. And lastly, what advice would you give to an organization that wants to do better but doesn't know where to start?
Slow down and take a breath. And that's because so often, as these conversations are happening more around co-production and engagement and bringing in lived experience folks, I think there's a bit of a knee-jerk reaction to suddenly quickly implement things straight away. And although, again, the intention behind it is good, when these things aren't thought out properly or properly planned, or you actually lean into, okay, why do we even want to do this? What should it look like? What do we want to achieve? That's when tokenism appears. Slow down, take a breath, and lean into the mess. Be willing to lean into it without defensiveness, because some really, really fantastic change can come from doing lived experience engagement. I see it all the time, and I'm lucky enough to be part of a lot of that work. So that would be my advice.
Wow. I think all three of those were amazing. Hopefully every single person that listens to that will take something away, because they were great. So thank you very much. So just to close, I always ask my guests one specific question at the end to round everything off. And your question would be, if there's one thing you wish people understood about supporting survivors, something that would genuinely change how survivors are treated, what would it be?
Make space for their joy. Make space for all the other parts of their humanity, identity. Don't just reduce them to the abuse experience that they've had. I have had such moments of laughter and joy and just ridiculousness in some of the engagement work I've done with survivors. And you can feel lots of things at once. You can be in deep pain and still find something funny. You can be talking about something really dark, really painful, and really difficult, and still be thinking about what you want to eat for lunch. You know, there's survivors aren't just these binary feelings. So that would be what I would say. Make space for it. Make space for joy. Make space for humanity. Make space for all the other aspects of themselves, because that's what they deserve. And that's what will make the work magic, really.
I think that's great. And I think you've mentioned humanization a lot during this call. And I think that's one thing that I'm going to take away, a survivor myself, is to remember that we're just human. I know this thing happened to us. And yeah, some days it does define who we are. We are just human. We find things funny. We eat. We go out drinking. We have friends. We work. We have all of the things that everyone else does. Yeah, I think I'm going to take that away. You mentioned it a lot and it's really stuck with me. And I'm going to remember that for myself. I'm human. I'm human.
Yeah.
I'm not just someone that had sexual abuse experience when I was younger. Yeah, like I said, there are days that define me and there are days that don't, and that's okay. And I'm human.
You're not just this one-dimensional person. You are a full being with lots of wonderful things that are part of you. And some of that is hard and difficult and dark, and some of that is full of light and sparkles. And I know that sounds really cheesy and like I'm being very like toxic positivity there, but what I'm trying to say is that you are allowed to be your full self always.
Yeah. Thank you. Honestly, thank you so much, Denise. It's just been such a joy speaking to you today, and thank you for all the work that you do and the care that you take with survivors. Your integrity that you bring to survivor participation is honestly incredible, and it's really shone today through this talk.
Thank you.
Yeah, your
Thank
support.
you so much for having me. It's been really nice to sit and actually talk and get into these nuances and tricky topics, because the only way that we can confront them is to talk about them.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you for having me.
No, honestly, thank you. It has been a joy, and I'm sure, like I said, this call is going to help so many people, and you've just been great. Yeah, thank you so much.